Four. So we're talking their run in the tournament and the shortcomings of the men's side of the conference in the tourney, all on today's episode of Locked On Pac-12 podcast.
You are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Pac-12 podcast. I know it's been a minute, but I'm back. We are talking all Pac-12 sports. But today's episode is brought to you by StatHero. StatHero is reshaping the way you play fantasy sports. Dozens of house-based games to play daily. No sharks, no funky props, just your skill versus the lineups you choose. Sign up today at stathero.com/lockedon. I'm your host, Cindy Robinson, and joining me today is Spencer McLaughlin from Locked On Ducks. He's actually going to be a more regular co-host of mine, as you'll be seeing him at least 3 times a week on Locked On Pac-12. But don't worry, he's still going to give you everything you need for Locked On Ducks. So you're just going to get double Spencer. You know, you can't get enough of Spencer, right?
Well, I mean, I certainly hope not, or else we could be in real trouble territory over here.
That's what I'm saying. But okay, Spencer, we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
I have been MIA from the podcast, so just to let people know, work has been crazy, but I'm back and I'm here, and we are going to make sure we're keeping you guys up to date on everything Pac-12 sports, starting with the women's NCAA tournament, but the Pac-12 team that is the only one standing out of all Pac-12 men and women, and that is Stanford women's basketball. Listen, the Stanford team is amazing. They are the defending champs, so really excited to see them back in the Final Four. I want to see if they can actually repeat and defend their title.
Yeah, and one thing that stands out when you look at this Stanford roster is sort of a glaring discrepancy right now between the men's game and the women's game. And that's that all these players who are supremely talented for Tara Vanderveer and the Cardinal, Cam Brink, Haley Jones, Lexi Holt, I mean, they have got a really stacked lineup there. They were on the team last year, right? Jones and Brink were, I know for sure, Russell Wilson's sister as well. That's just not something you see very often. Usually on the men's side, a team wins a national championship and guys who are fringe NBA prospects are going to capitalize on that momentum of showcasing their talents on the biggest stage to parlay that into being a higher NBA draft pick than they otherwise might have been. And guys who are going to be one and done anyway, like Duke's Paolo Banchero this year, or Purdue's Jaden Ivey. There's a bunch of other guys, and it's just a regular thing and has been for some time. You just don't see that as often on the women's side, and I think that that's contributed to the growth of the game over the last few years, because you need stars. You need people who are recognizable, who are familiar, who draw attention, who draw eyeballs, who are easy to talk about, and who are really great players. And if they're only hanging around in college basketball for 1 year, it's a lot harder to do that. And so I think that's the first thing that stands out for me is when you watch this Stanford team, they play very well together at both ends of the floor. They got a lot of experience, but their depth of talent is ridiculous. And there's just not that many programs, I think, on the men's side that you would see doing that. I mean, Duke has to lock and reload basically every year because guys are going to the NBA. I think the only comp really would be Villanova, but they're not bringing in the sort of high-level players. They produce quality NBA players, but on the whole, they bring in guys who are just solid, fit their system, play good fundamental basketball. Those sorts of guys return year in and year out. But for Stanford to have a star-studded roster the way that they do, that's already won a national championship and back in the Final Four again, I think it bodes really, really well for their chances to repeat as national champs.
Yeah, it speaks a lot to their team and the chemistry that they have. But like you said, they've been able to build that with each other. Having Haley Jones and Lexi Holt lead the charge and be the captains of the team and really just helping that team. I think they said that them two scored either all the points in the second half for the team or at least majority of the points. And that says a lot right there, right? But also you have teammates stepping up in role playing spots, right? Lacey Hall had to step up in her position in the team that like through the rest of this run in the tournament. And you just starting to see everybody knows their roles and playing it well. And that's why they're able to actually finish out games. That game against Texas was close throughout the whole time. It's like never one moment where you just knew who was going to win. It was like super close. But because of their chemistry, because, you know, they're playing their roles and they're doing what they know that they can do, I don't feel like there was ever a moment of panic for them. It was like, let's just keep playing. We're going to finish it out all 4 quarters. And now they're headed to the Final Four. I'm excited to see how they do in the Final Four. It's going to be really exciting time. I will be in Minnesota, so I'm going to get a firsthand look at everything.
Awesome.
But coming up next, Spencer and I are going to dive deeper into the men's shortcomings that we have seen on the Pac-12 side, because unfortunately, it's just not been what we've expected. We definitely wanted to see at least one Pac-12 team make it to the elite or the final. UCLA didn't make it to the elite.
Oh,
UCLA I don't know. We'll
got to only got to the Sweet 16, I think. Yeah, because they should have played Baylor, but they lost to North Carolina instead. Arizona got also to the Sweet 16. They lost to Houston, and then SC
okay, wait. We're gonna get to it next. We're gonna get to it next.
To get to there. It was not the year for the Conference of Champions on the men's side of things.
Right, and it's so frustrating, but it's okay. For those of you that, you know, are into getting into the March Madness betting, but literally can never win a bracket, it can never go at least the first 2 rounds without having your bracket busted. StatHero is where you want to be, okay? StatHero's NCAA single game pick'ems pits the star players against each other in an amazing hybrid between fantasy and sports gambling. Take control back from those handicappers that always seem to have the advantage. Start focusing on the players you know best with the gameplay that doesn't rely on big spreads, long odds, or funky props. StatHero gives you the advantage, resulting in their gamers winning 4 times more often. Why? Because StatHero eliminates the mystery about who or what you're going up against. In addition to their pick'ems games, they also have dozens of lineups you can comb through to take on head-to-head. They simply post sets of players for you to take on with a set of players you choose. StatHero is the easiest and fastest way to get your sports action fix. The simple, sleek gameplay will have you playing in minutes. This is what daily fantasy was meant to be. Sign up for free right now at stathero.com/lockedon and use promo code for a 100% deposit match. That's stathero.com/lockedon and then use the promo code LOCKEDON for a 100% match. stathero.com/lockedon, promo code LOCKEDON. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Pac-12 podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, now, Spencer, I do want to talk more about Stanford women's basketball, but I feel like one thing, because I was MIA throughout the whole tournament and the conference tournament, that I haven't really got to talk about the men's action on Locked On Pac-12, and I feel like we cannot slight our audience and not, discuss that. I definitely will say I was underwhelmed by the performances from the Pac-12, and I'm going to say it right now, USC disappointed me probably the most, okay? How do you go out in the first round? Like, what? And that's not to slight Miami at all, but it just was like a blow to the face. Like, I definitely had them going. I actually had USC making the Final Four in my bracket, and I know that might have been ambitious, but come on.
Well, first things first. In March Madness, in a year where a 15 seed got to the Elite Eight, there is no such thing as too ambitious, Cindy. I mean, an 8 seed is in the Final Four. 7 seeds have made it before. I think the last one was South Carolina. That might have been like 2000, I want to say 17, 18 or so. Loyola Chicago got to the Final Four. I mean, you can look back in retrospect and say, oh, that wasn't a good pick. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. But I don't think there's ever such a thing as a truly bad pick now that we've seen a 15 seed get to the Elite Eight.
Yeah, and I know this is a Locked On Pac-12 podcast, but St. Peter's, I gotta
Everyone
give
is
it.
a St. Peter's fan. St. Peter's is an honorary member of every conference in the country. I won't hear arguments to the contrary.
Immediately.
I won't hear arguments against it.
Watching today, I was so hurt. I was still hoping for like some type of miracle to happen in those last 10 minutes. Cause that was a moment where I feel like both of them were like not scoring. So I was like, this is your chance, make a move. And it didn't happen. So it hurt to see them go out like that. But I am so proud just of their run. Their run was crazy. Just exciting time. Same thing with Creighton on the women's side. Yeah, there you go. I'm like, say it the right way. On the women's side, they had a great run too. Some major upsets. I've enjoyed seeing some of those upsets happen on the women's side because the narrative is that the women's tournament isn't as exciting because there's no upsets and there's no, we already know who's going to make it. And it's like, yes, a lot of the teams that we're seeing make the Final Four right now are kind of teams we expected to be there, but there's been some good matchups for sure. And I think that people are doing themselves a disservice by automatically writing off the women's tournament and not giving it a real chance. Because I think we've seen some impressive moments for sure.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of impressive teams, Stanford being at the forefront, really. And South Carolina's probably the trendy pick to win it all. As we record this, they've got UConn tomorrow, and Paige Beckers is back. I wouldn't want to mess with UConn. I mean, it's a good team who's getting their best player back. I mean, I see how you could really go for picking UConn in that game, but I think South Carolina is really, really good. I expect them to beat the Huskies in that game and get to the Final Four. And I think
South Carolina's already in the Final Four. It's NC State, I think.
NC State. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I flip-flopped. I like NC State in that game to beat UConn. Yeah. I think everyone's going to see the brand of UConn women's basketball and think that's going to be a win. But I think that you're going to have a lot of the top seeds in there. And that'll be a great test for Stanford. It'll be an opportunity for them to show what they're capable of against the very best in college basketball, because you're not going up against a Cinderella team. Creighton wasn't able to pull off the upset. And so I think when you look at the bracket and where it stands for Stanford, I think from a roster perspective, they can go toe-to-toe with anybody in the country. I mean,
I 100%
if your top two players are Haley Jones and Cameron Brink, there's just not that many tandems, if any, in the country that can match up with those two. And then you have the Hull twins in there as well. And it's a really, really deep team. And that's a critical thing in March. And a lot of their best players, this is always the important thing, whether you're looking at the men's side or the women's side. Ball handlers win in March. Always, always, always. I hated Illinois coming into the bracket. I thought they were too dependent on Kofi Coburn on the men's side. I picked Chattanooga to beat them, and Chattanooga should have won that game. Illinois instead got trounced by Houston the second round. If you're dependent on a forward and you don't have elite primary ball handlers, it's just tough to get them the ball in rhythm and within the flow of the offense to make plays. So that's one reason that I really like this Stanford team is you're going to see Haley Jones with the ball in her hands a lot. You're going to see Hull and Wilson being the primary ball handlers. And then you have an elite post player like Cam Brink. I think that's just a really deep lineup, and they can go toe-to-toe with anybody in the country. And repeating is really hard, and they're 2 games away, but when you look at the talent and depth that they have, I think they can absolutely do it.
Yeah, at this point, I'm wondering too, if they do repeat, how will that affect, if at all, the National Player of the Year? Because Haley Jones is up for it, along with Aaliyah Boston from South Carolina, Nalissa Smith from Baylor, and Naz Hillman from Michigan. And I think when it comes down to it, if we're looking based off of actual performances, I think it's gonna come down to Haley or Aaliyah. And I think everyone already has Aaliyah stamped in their minds that it's her and it's her award. But I wonder if Stanford's able to repeat and Haley has an amazing game, does that change that conversation?
It certainly can, depending on how how much the voters are allowed to factor in the NCAA tournament, because a lot of times we see MVP or National Player of the Year awards separate from postseason play,
Yeah,
which is just so backwards and illogical, whether in college or the pros. It makes my
right.
blood boil. It's the dumbest thing in the world. I mean, an MVP in the NBA hasn't won the championship. I think something like the last 12. I think LeBron was the last one
Yeah,
to do it
that's
when he was with the Heatles. Like it's ridiculous that we separate those two things as a sports society, but hopefully in 10 years we'll look back and say what a dumb time that was, because it made
right.
absolutely no sense. And I think if you're Stanford, you can't be focusing on that. I know Haley Jones won't be focusing on that. If you watch her play on the court, you know she's a stone cold killer, and
Yeah,
individual awards are great and all, but there's only one thing that she and the Cardinal and Coach Vanderveer have got on their minds, and that's bringing that national championship trophy back to the West Coast in a conference that could really use some national championships.
yeah,
It's been a shortcoming after shortcoming in recent years. And football, as I'm sure we'll get to in the coming weeks, is just not in a great place right now on a
yeah,
national championship level, and maybe they'll be able to get there with USC. I think that's a while away, and it's tough. So you take them where you can get them, and hopefully Stanford's able to bring one back to the West Coast, up to Palo
yeah.
Alto.
We're fingers crossed for you. Okay. Coming up next, Spencer and I will legit actually talk about the men's side and how we feel about their performances. We keep going on tangents, but we have to give Stanford the proper love. So, yes, coming up next, we're talking men's Pac-12 basketball. Okay, we're deep into March, and if you're still holding on to those New Year's resolutions, I am so proud of you. Keep it going by picking up a new snack, and that's Built Bars, okay? Best way to stick to those New Year's resolutions of keeping in shape and staying healthy. Built Bars are a perfect snack just for that. If you haven't tried the Puffs, you're missing out on one of the Built Bars' best tasting bars, okay? Puffs are the first ever protein infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Yes, I said Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, Puffs included, okay? They're low in calorie, high protein, perfect replacement for those candy bars. And they're even better because, low in calories. Most Built Bars have low calories, low sugar, low carbs, and high protein value. Mint brownie, coconut almond are just a few of the multiple flavors to choose from. Don't take my word for it. Just go try it for yourself. I definitely recommend, though. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Okay, so men's Pac-12 basketball. I think going into the tournament, we felt really confident at the fact that there were so many teams from the Pac-12 actually in the tournament. You had USC, UCLA, Arizona.
It was just the three. It was just the three. They had teams on the bubble, but
that's what it was. Okay, I'm gonna
yeah.
be quite honest with you, 100% honest with you. I haven't given the men's as much attention because I am literally in charge of the women's strategy for my job. So, my other job. So,
That's what
my
I'm here
focus
for.
has been, huh? What'd you say?
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, my focus has been heavily on the women, but when it comes to men, I still feel like those top three, we knew those three were more than likely the teams that were going to go and expected to go farther in the tournament. They played well all season, kind of had some hiccups, some upsets in their regular season, but still for the most part, all three teams were super strong. Seeing USC go out in the first round, I need to reiterate how mad I was. The game was actually really good. It was frustrating to see USC wait to the very end to start making, those adjustments necessary. And then all of a sudden this one player is like making all these points in the last few seconds. And I'm like, wait, they went from this game is over to wait, now they're really in it in the last few seconds. I'm confused. And that last shot he threw up, with how close it was, and it was practically a half court shot. I'm like, I don't know if you deserve to go or not, like deserve to win that or not. Like, because on one end, I'm mad you waited so long to like Come on, I hate the last minute people. I hate the last minute teams. Don't play like crap all game, or not crap, but not giving you your all game, and then all of a sudden you want to try to get it together at the end where it doesn't really matter anymore. But I just feel like USC did not show up as the USC team that we knew of them to be all year long. I could be wrong though.
Yeah, so here's the thing. I actually picked Miami to win that game in my
bracket.
I don't know if that makes me a disloyal co-host of Locked On Pac-12 or if it makes me an honest one. But USC had a couple things working against them in this game. Number one, they had to go all the way across the country. That game was played, I believe it was in South Carolina. So USC is going from LA to South Carolina, and they're playing Miami. So the distance that you have to travel absolutely matters. And I think that's part of the reason that USC got off to a slow start and fell behind and ultimately lost the game. But as we saw, Miami made a run to the Elite Eight. That was a really well-coached defensive team. And their head coach of the Hurricanes, by the way, same head coach who led George Mason to the Final Four back in 2006. In our lifetimes, the first big-time Cinderella, St. Peter's being the latest, of course. When you look at the Pac-12 writ large, I never thought USC was going to be able to make a deep run. Drew Peterson is a good player, so is Isaiah Mobley, but I thought they kind of lacked the guard play. They didn't have a primary ball handler the way they did with Taj Edey, the Santa Clara transfer a season ago, that helped them run to the Elite Eight. I thought that he was critical to help them just create shots in moments and also hit some open threes. He hit big shots throughout the season as well. I think they missed him. UCLA, I'm not going to say that UCLA was a major letdown this year. I think that when you look at the body of work they put up this season, it was a very good year for the Bruins. They get to the Sweet 16. They should have won that game against North Carolina, but the Tar Heels just had a little bit more love, Caleb Love to be specific. When a guy is asking for the ball, he's begging for the ball. Even after he missed a shot, that's when you know he's in the zone. He knows he's right there, and he hit those big couple of shots down the stretch, and UCLA played well enough to win that game, couldn't come through. Arizona, I loved their talent. I wanted so badly to pick Arizona as my national champion. I think the only thing that held them back is Tommy Lloyd's a first-time head coach. He comes from an excellent coaching tree. Mark Few up in Gonzaga, who gets to the tournament every year. You say whatever you want about the Zags. They're one of the best programs in college basketball. You can add me below if you're mad
right. If you really feeling froggy, but
yeah, I know. I mean, he's made 7 straight Sweet 16s, but I go off about how he's a terrible coach who's been to 2 national championship games in the last 5 years. So that's where he comes from, and I think Tommy Lloyd has done a remarkable job. He should be the national coach of the year. I mean, Arizona was picked to finish, I think, middle of the conference or so. They end up as a 1 seed the NCAA tournament. They ran into a tough matchup, a team in Houston that they can match up with athletically, but it's a tough one for them. It's tough for anybody. That Houston team is really, really good. Kelvin Sampson's a remarkable coach, and he got to the Final Four last year with Houston. I think a lot of people forgot that. They had some injuries throughout the year. That's why they dropped down to a 5. But Houston and Memphis both, if you watched them throughout the year, you know that they were criminally underseeded coming into the tournament. I thought Arizona would get past them just because of their talent, but I was talking to a friend before the game, and he was going to go on another show and just wanted to pick my brain a little bit. And I said, look, if Mathurin is under 17.5 points, I don't think Arizona can win because he's kind of their emotional, spiritual leader. And if he's struggling from the floor, which he did, and I think he ended up with 15 points on a very inefficient shooting night overall, then life was going to be very tough for him. And it ultimately was. So I didn't think it was a bad tournament showing for the Pac-12. The issue was only having 3 teams going into the tournament. That was the Oregon coming up short and no one else really even being close. Colorado, I think, sniffed around the bubble for about half an hour. Then Lenardi kicked him to the curb like an old toy that you don't want anymore. It's like they were there for very briefly. They were kind of in the next 4 out, and then they had a bad loss in there somewhere and learn. I said, no, you're done. So I think the Pac-12's got some work to do, but winning a March Madness is tough. It's really, really tough. And those Arizona UCLA teams, they were really talented. And that's the disappointing part of it is they're not going to have similar cores next year. Matherin's likely going to be a lottery pick in the NBA. UCLA will lose most of their team, really, and Mick Cronin will have to reload down there in Los Angeles. So
really quick, that was probably the most frustrating part about it for UCLA, knowing that they returned so many players from last season, that, you know, they had the deep run last year in the tournament. And it was one of those, like, we need to run it back and actually execute to the Final Four. And just not even getting as close as you were last year, like, that hurts. Because now, you, like you said, you're starting fresh, you know, you're going to lose those players. It's not having that return. So it's like, not saying they came back for nothing, right? Because it's still a great season overall.
No, they
should be proud.
They had a really good season, and that was a team that could have gone to the Final Four. I mean, 100%, and we know that because they got there a season ago, and they had really high expectations coming in. They faltered a little bit, but started to pick up steam late in the season, and I loved the way that they were playing. Their depth was really good. I mean, 1 through 5, that's one of the best starting fives in college basketball this year. That's why they were a preseason top 5 team. You have Tiger Campbell, Jules Bernard, Johnny Juzang, Jaime Jaquez, and the big fella down low. There's just a bunch of guys there that, you know, give them a lot of versatility. And like I said earlier, they should have won that game against North Carolina. They had it. I thought there were 3 or 4 moments in the second half where they were going to pull away, and they just ultimately couldn't get it done, which is surprising for a team that knows how to execute in those situations. But sometimes you just have to tip your cap and say North Carolina played well, and they're going to the Final Four, and Caleb Love was just really good in that game. So I think it was less that UCLA and Arizona lost it, and more that the other teams they were playing were, you know, just playing well, hitting their shots and hitting their stride at the right time. And they just ran into a couple of buzzsaws. Really, really good teams.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Spencer, thank you for coming on, and welcome to
I'll be back.
On Pac-12 podcast as a regular co-host. Definitely enjoy talking with you. You're very insightful. Love to have your analysis on here. I think the Pac-12 audience is going to appreciate having you on a regular basis. You guys can make sure you catch us on Locked On Pac-12 podcast, on YouTube. Why am I
everywhere
blanking?
You get your podcast?
Everywhere you get your podcast from. I know. I'm like, hello, get it out to me. But also check out Locked On Ducks podcast, where Spencer is specifically talking everything Oregon Ducks. Basketball's over for the Ducks, so I know you're probably heading forward, looking into the draft, and we'll start talking about that too. Any of the Pac-12 players we have possibly going to be drafted. Could talk a little bit about some pro days coming up too. I mean, that have been happening. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. But a lot to come. We're back. We're back in action. Tell your friends, tell your sisters, tell your family, tell everybody to make sure they check out Locked On Pac-12 podcast. It's back and it's in action. Also, you definitely want to check out Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts, so make sure you go check it out. Also, like, comment, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And thank you guys for listening, checking out Locked On Pac-12 podcast, and make sure you guys continue to stay locked on the Locked On Network.